In 1895, workers digging near Steelville, Missouri struck something that stopped them cold. Buried 8 feet underground, they uncovered what appeared to be a human skull, except it wasn't normal-sized. The skull was massive, with an estimated height when they found the rest of the bones of nearly 9 feet tall. This wasn't a one-time thing. Similar discoveries were reported from Ohio, from California, from the Lovelock Cave in Nevada. Ancient texts from every corner of the world speak of giants. The Bible mentions the Nephilim. Greek mythology is full of titans and cyclops. Norse legends tell of the Jotnar. Native American tribes from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains have oral histories of giant beings who lived before them. Mesopotamian tablets describe kings of enormous stature. Even Easter Island legends speak of 2 races, one of normal size and one of giants. Here's the question that keeps anthropologists, archaeologists and historians arguing in academic journals and conference halls. Were giants real? Today we're going to explore one of the most persistent mysteries in human history. Here's the question. Not with easy answers, because there are archaeologists and historians by following the evidence arguing in academic journals, through cutting-edge genetic science, through the fossil record of creatures that actually walked this earth, through the myths and legends that every ancient culture seems to share. Because here's what makes this fascinating. Sometimes myths are memories. Sometimes stories passed down for thousands of years contain kernels of truth that got distorted, exaggerated, woven into the fabric of legend, but started from something real. If you're using this to fall asleep, perfect. That's exactly why I make these. So subscribe maybe, and tell me where you are and what time it is right now. I check the comments and it's wild. Tokyo at lunch, Toronto at midnight, London at dawn, all watching together. We're going to start with science, hard science. Because in 2010, researchers analysing a fragment of finger bone from a Siberian cave discovered something that changed everything we thought we knew about human evolution. The Denisovans, an entire species of human cousins we didn't know existed. And here's the kicker. Some of them were huge, possibly 8 or 9 feet tall, based on the massive jaw fragments we found. They weren't mythological, they were real. They lived alongside our ancestors, and their DNA is still inside some of us today. Then we're going to look at the megafauna, the actual giants that roamed the earth during the time when early humans were spreading across the continents. 12-foot tall ground sloths, mammoths that towered 15 feet at the shoulder, the short-faced bear that stood 12 feet on its hind legs and could run faster than a horse. Our ancestors lived with these creatures, hunted them, feared them, and remembered them. But memory is a strange thing. Over thousands of years, stories change. Real encounters with unusually tall human populations, real battles with massive prehistoric animals, maybe even real interactions with other human species like the Denisovans, all of this could have been woven together into the giant myths that appear in every ancient culture from Sumeria to Polynesia. We're going to walk through the archaeological evidence, the genetic discoveries that are rewriting textbooks, and yes, the controversies, the hoaxes that fooled newspapers, the misidentified bones, but also the discoveries that don't fit neatly into conventional explanations, the giant footprints preserved in ancient stone, the architectural mysteries that make engineers scratch their heads, the consistent descriptions across cultures that never had contact with each other. It isn't about proving or disproving giants. It's about exploring what we know, what we found, and what might be hiding in the gaps between folklore and fact. Because whether giants were literal 9-foot-tall beings, or the distorted cultural memory of Denisovans and megafauna, the stories themselves tell us something profound about our ancestors and the world they survived. So settle in, get comfortable. Let's travel back to a time when the world was stranger, more dangerous, and possibly inhabited by beings that would tower over us today. let's explore the real story of giants. Now, before we dive into the myths and legends of giants that echo through every culture on Earth, we need to talk about something that sounds like it belongs in a fantasy novel, but is actually hard science. There really were giants walking among us. Not metaphorical giants, not mythological beings, but actual flesh and blood humans who were substantially larger, more robust and more powerful than the average person you'd meet on the street today. The story begins in 2008 in a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. A place so remote, so isolated, that it seemed like the last place on Earth you'd make a discovery that would rewrite human history. Russian archaeologists were excavating Denisova Cave, a site that had been occupied intermittently for hundreds of thousands of years. Among the layers of ancient debris, they found a tiny fragment of a finger bone, just the tip of a pinky finger from a child who had died maybe 50,000 years ago. Most finger bones wouldn't tell you much. You'd get some basic information about age and maybe sex, but that's about it. Except this bone was exceptionally well preserved in the cold Siberian climate. Well preserved enough that scientists could extract DNA, not just fragments, but high-quality genetic material. And when they sequenced that DNA, they realized they were looking at something nobody had predicted. This wasn't a modern human. It wasn't a Neanderthal either, though it was related to both. It was something else entirely. A completely unknown species of human that had somehow remained hidden from science until a Russian team found a child's fingertip in a cave on the edge of nowhere. They called them Denisovans after the cave where they were discovered. And as more genetic analysis came in, the picture that emerged was extraordinary. These weren't just another branch on the human family tree. They were a major lineage, as distinct from modern humans as Neanderthals were, but they'd left almost no fossil record. Just that finger bone, a few teeth, and eventually a jawbone found by a monk in Tibet. That's it. That's all the physical evidence we have of a species that once ranged across half of Asia and interbred with our ancestors for thousands of years. But here's where it gets interesting for our discussion of giants. Those few bones they did find were massive. The finger bone, even from a child, showed dimensions suggesting hands significantly larger than those of modern humans. The teeth were enormous, with molar roots so large they'd look out of place in a modern human jaw. Most telling was that jawbone from Tibet. When anthropologists analysed it, they found it belonged to an individual who would have been substantially larger and more robust than the average modern human. We're not talking about someone who was just tall. We're talking about bone density, muscle attachment points, an overall skeletal structure that suggests a human who was built on a fundamentally different scale. The genetic evidence backs this up. Modern populations in Melanesia, parts of Southeast Asia, and among Tibetan highlanders carry significant amounts of Denisovan DNA. Some populations have as much as 5% of their genome derived from these ancient humans. And when geneticists analyse which Denisovan genes have persisted, they find something fascinating. Many of them are related to body size, bone density and muscle development. The Denisovans weren't just genetically different. They were physically larger, stronger, more robust than modern humans. In every meaningful sense, they were giants. But they weren't alone. The more we learn about human evolution, the more we realise that larger, more robust human species were actually the norm for most of our history. Modern humans, with our gracile builds and relatively slender bones, were actually the exception. We're the weird ones. Take Homo heidelbergensis. These were the ancestors of both Neanderthals and Denisovans, living in Europe and Asia between 700,000 and 300,000 years ago. The fossil evidence shows they were massive. Males probably averaged around 6 feet tall, but with bone structure and muscle mass that would dwarf modern humans of the same height. Their skulls were thick, almost brutally so, with prominent brow ridges and massive jaws. One skull found in Greece had cranial bones over an inch thick. That's not just robust, That's armor plating. These humans were built to survive in environments that would kill modern humans. Cold climates, direct competition with large predators, hunting megafauna with primitive weapons. You needed size and strength just to survive. And then there were the Neanderthals. We've already talked about them, but it's worth emphasizing just how different they were from us physically. The average Neanderthal male was shorter than the average modern human, maybe 5'5" to 5'7", but they were incredibly robust. Skeletal analysis suggests they had about 30% more muscle mass than a modern human of the same height. Their bones show evidence of incredible physical stress, healed injuries that would have been fatal without the kind of muscle and bone density they possessed. Some anthropologists estimate that an adult male Neanderthal could have been 40 to 50 pounds heavier than a modern human of the same height, almost all of it muscle and dense bone. They weren't giants in terms of height, but in terms of physical power and robustness, they absolutely were. Now this raises an obvious question. If these robust, large-bodied humans were so well adapted to Ice Age environments, why are we, the gracile, relatively weak modern humans, the ones who survived? Why did the giants go extinct while we inherited the Earth? The answer is complicated, but it probably comes down to efficiency and adaptability. Those massive bodies required enormous amounts of food. A Neanderthal needed perhaps 500 to 1,000 more calories per day than a modern human. In times of plenty, that was fine. But when resources were scarce, which happened frequently during the Ice Age, those high energy requirements became a liability. Modern humans could survive on less food, which meant we could occupy marginal environments that couldn't support Neanderthal populations. We were weaker individually, but we could live in more places, adapt to more situations. In the long run, that flexibility won out. But the story of human giants isn't just about extinct species. Even within modern human populations, we see evidence of how environmental pressures can produce dramatically different body sizes. The Maasai people of East Africa average over 6 feet tall, with warriors sometimes reaching 7 feet. This isn't a genetic disease or abnormality, it's an adaptation. In the East African savanna, height provides advantages for spotting predators, dissipating heat, and projecting dominance. Natural selection has favoured taller individuals for thousands of years. Conversely, some modern human populations show evidence of evolutionary pressure towards smaller body size. The Pygmy peoples of Central Africa average under 5 feet tall, an adaptation to life in dense rainforest, where agility and lower caloric requirements provide survival advantages. This tells us something crucial. Human body size is incredibly plastic, responsive to environmental pressures over relatively short evolutionary timescales. Given the right conditions, human populations can shift significantly in average size within just a few thousand years. Which brings us to a controversial but scientifically documented phenomenon: gigantism. Not as a species-wide trait, but as a condition affecting individuals. Throughout history, there have been humans who reach truly enormous sizes due to hormonal conditions, particularly overproduction of growth hormone. The tallest reliably measured human in history was Robert Wadlow, who reached 8 feet 11 inches before his death in 1940. Historical records document numerous individuals who reached 7'6", 8 feet, even taller in some accounts. Now here's where documented fact starts brushing up against intriguing possibility. Modern cases of gigantism are usually identified and treated medically. Growth hormone overproduction gets diagnosed, managed, brought under control, but in prehistoric populations without modern medicine, individuals with gigantism would have grown unchecked. How tall could they have reached? What would they have looked like? More importantly, in small tribal populations where everyone knew everyone else, these individuals would have been unforgettable, literally giant humans walking among normal-sized people. The genetic evidence from Denisovans adds another layer to this puzzle. Remember, modern humans interbred with Denisovans. We carry their genes. Some of those genes affect growth and development. Is it possible that in populations with high concentrations of Denisovan DNA, these growth-related genes sometimes produced individuals who were significantly larger than average? Not through disease, but through the expression of ancient genetic variants that had been selected for in Denisovan populations. We don't know for certain. But we do know that Tibetan populations which carry significant Denisovan DNA have genetic variants that affect not just oxygen processing, but also bone density and skeletal development. These are the same populations that have legends of enormous humans living in the mountains. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's worth noting. The archaeological record adds its own hints. Occasionally, archaeologists uncover skeletal remains that are unusually large. A femur from a late Neolithic site in Romania that, if proportions hold, belonged to an individual who would have stood over 7 feet tall. Fragmentary remains from various sites around the world suggesting the presence of unusually robust individuals in ancient populations. Most of these finds are poorly documented, contaminated with later materials, or simply too fragmentary to draw firm conclusions from. But they persist, whispers in the archaeological record that maybe, just maybe, there were individuals in prehistoric populations who would have seemed like giants to their contemporaries. And then there's the environmental factor we haven't fully explored. During the Pleistocene, when these robust human species were at their peak, the world was different in ways that might have favoured larger body sizes. Higher oxygen content in the atmosphere, different nutritional availability, different selection pressures from megafauna predators. Some paleontologists have noted that many Pleistocene mammals were larger than their modern counterparts, not just famous megafauna like mammoths and giant sloths, but also wolves, bears, cats, even rodents. There was something about the Pleistocene environment that favoured large body size across multiple species. Is it so unreasonable to think humans might have been affected too? The Denisovans, the Neanderthals, Homo heidelbergensis, these weren't myths. They were real. They were large, robust, powerful humans who lived alongside our ancestors, competed with them, bred with them, and ultimately vanished, leaving behind only fragments of bone and traces of DNA. But they also left behind something else. Memories. Stories passed down through generations, growing and changing with each retelling, but perhaps preserving some kernel of truth about the giants who once walked the earth. Because here's the thing, every major culture on the planet has legends of giants. Not just tall people, but beings fundamentally different in size and power from normal humans. We tend to dismiss these stories as pure fantasy, but we're learning that many ancient myths have roots in real phenomena. The Greek legends of Cyclops probably originated from people finding elephant skulls, with their large central nasal openings looking like single eye sockets. The dragon myths of Europe may preserve memories of finding dinosaur bones. So what if the giant myths, so universal, so persistent, preserve some racial memory of encountering other human species? What if some ancient human populations really did meet Denisovans, or late surviving populations of Homo heidelbergensis? Humans who were genuinely, measurably giants compared to early Homo sapiens. We're probably never going to find a complete Denisovan skeleton. The fossil record is too sparse, too fragmentary. But every year, genetic analysis gets more sophisticated. We're finding more Denisovan DNA in modern populations, identifying more genetic variants that trace back to these mysterious giants of Asia. And with each discovery, the picture becomes a little clearer. They were real, they were large, and they're still with us, written in the DNA of millions of people alive today. The giants may be gone, but they're not entirely lost. They're part of us, part of the human story that we're only now beginning to fully understand. But humans weren't the only giants walking the earth during our early evolution. Not even close. While our ancestors were struggling to survive the bottleneck, while Denisovans were adapting to the highlands of Asia, and while Neanderthals were mastering Ice Age Europe, they were sharing the world with creatures that would make even the tallest human look tiny. We're talking about megafauna, the real giants, animals so massive, so impossibly large, that when their bones were discovered thousands of years later, they would spark legends of giants, monsters, and creatures from the realm of gods. Picture yourself 50,000 years ago. You're part of a small hunting band moving across what is now Siberia. It's spring, the ice is retreating, and ahead of you, crossing a wide grassland valley, you see something that stops you in your tracks. A woolly mammoth, not just big, towering, 4 meters tall at the shoulder, weighing 6 tons, with curved tusks stretching 4.5 meters long. Its shaggy coat hangs almost to the ground, each hair as thick as your finger. When it walks, you can feel the vibration through the earth. When it trumpets, the sound carries for kilometers. This isn't just an elephant with extra fur. This is a walking mountain. And mammoths weren't even the biggest things out there. In South America, your distant cousins were encountering ground sloths the size of elephants. Megatherium could stand 6 meters tall on its hind legs, taller than a giraffe. It had claws the length of your forearm. Despite being a herbivore, it was powerful enough to knock down trees to reach the leaves at the top. These animals weighed 4 tons. 4 tons of muscle, fur and bone, moving through forests that would later inspire tales of giants lurking in unexplored wilderness. Australia had even stranger giants. The Diprotodon was essentially a wombat the size of a rhinoceros, weighing up to 2,800 kilograms. Imagine stumbling across one while tracking kangaroos across the outback. It's 3 meters long, standing as tall as a human at the shoulder, with massive grinding teeth designed to process huge quantities of vegetation. And it wasn't alone. Australia's megafauna included giant kangaroos standing 3 meters tall, massive flightless birds, and varanid lizards that made modern Komodo dragons look like house pets. Terror birds stalked South America until relatively recently in evolutionary terms. Phorusrhacids stood up to 3 meters tall with massive hooked beaks capable of crushing bone. These weren't scavengers, they were apex predators, fast enough to run down prey, powerful enough to kill animals much larger than themselves. Some survived until as recently as 15,000 years ago, meaning early humans in South America definitely encountered them. Imagine trying to explain that to your grandchildren decades later. A bird as tall as 2 men, that hunted people. North America had its own collection of giants, dire wolves, larger and more powerful than modern wolves, hunting in packs. Short-faced bears that stood 3.5 meters tall on their hind legs and could run as fast as a horse. Giant beavers the size of modern bears, with teeth longer than your hand. Mastodons, mammoths, giant bison with horn spans reaching 2.1 meters. Camels. Yes, camels evolved in North America, and some species grew enormous before going extinct. These weren't creatures from the age of dinosaurs. These were animals that lived alongside humans. Animals our ancestors hunted, feared, competed with, and eventually watched disappear. And here's the thing. We know they encountered them because we have the evidence. Archaeological sites across multiple continents show clear proof of human-megafauna interaction. In Siberia, mammoth hunting sites show sophisticated kill strategies. Humans would drive mammoths into natural traps, ravines or bogs where the massive animals would become stuck. Then they'd move in with spears, targeting vulnerable areas. It took coordination, planning, and incredible courage to hunt an animal that could kill you with a casual swing of its trunk. But the payoff was enormous. One mammoth could feed an entire band for weeks or months. The meat could be preserved through freezing. The bones became shelter frames. The tusks became tools, The hide provided waterproof covering, nothing was wasted. Cave paintings from Europe provide stunning visual evidence. Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, dozens of caves contain detailed, accurate depictions of Ice Age megafauna. Not crude sketches. Sophisticated artwork showing intimate knowledge of animal anatomy, behaviour, movement. The artists had clearly studied these creatures extensively. You can see mammoths with their distinctive humped profiles, woolly rhinos with their massive horns, cave lions that were 25% larger than modern lions. These weren't imaginary creatures, these were neighbours. In North America, Clovis points, those distinctive fluted spear points have been found embedded in mammoth bones. Kill sites in Arizona, New Mexico, and across the Great Plains show evidence of systematic hunting. Humans had figured out how to take down the largest land mammals on the continent. Some sites show evidence of processing, butchering marks on bones, piles of discarded remains. This was industrial-scale exploitation of megafauna. But here's where it gets really interesting for our understanding of giant myth. All across the world, these massive animals started going extinct right around the time humans showed up. In Australia, the megafauna disappeared around 45,000 years ago, shortly after humans arrived. In North America, most megafauna went extinct between 15,000 and 10,000 years ago, as human populations expanded. In Europe and Asia, the pattern is similar. Species that had survived for millions of years suddenly vanished within a few thousand years of human arrival. Scientists still debate whether humans were the primary cause or whether climate change deserves most of the blame. Probably it was both. Climate change stressed these populations, reduced their ranges, disrupted their food supplies. Then humans showed up, hunting the already stressed populations, competing for resources, maybe even introducing diseases. Together, these pressures were too much. Within a few thousand years, the Age of Giants ended, but the memories didn't disappear, and neither did the bones. This is crucial for understanding giant myths across cultures, because for thousands of years after the megafauna went extinct, humans kept finding their remains. Imagine you're living in ancient Greece. You're digging a foundation for a new building. Your shovel hits something hard. You dig more carefully and uncover a bone. Except it's not a normal bone. It's enormous. A femur the size of a tree trunk. A skull with a single large opening in the front. You have no concept of elephants or mammoths, which went extinct in Europe thousands of years before your civilization arose. You have no framework for understanding extinct species. What would you think? The most logical explanation, given your knowledge, is that these bones came from giants. Massive humanoid creatures that once walked the earth. That skull with a large opening, that's not a mammoth skull with a trunk socket. That's a cyclops skull with a single eye socket. That massive femur that belonged to a titan, one of the giant beings your mythology describes as existing in the distant past. This isn't speculation. Ancient Greek and Roman writers explicitly describe finding enormous bones and identifying them as remains of giants and heroes. Pausanias, writing in the 2nd century CE, describes several discoveries of massive bones that were interpreted as belonging to legendary figures. The same pattern appears across cultures. Native American legends often describe finding bones of ancient giants. Chinese texts reference discoveries of massive remains. In each case, people were likely discovering megafauna fossils and interpreting them through their cultural lens. The Diprotodon skull could easily be mistaken for some kind of giant human skull if you'd never seen one before. Mammoth bones, when partially exposed by erosion, can look remarkably like large human remains. Ground sloth bones, cave bear skeletons, any of the massive mammals that once lived alongside humans could be misidentified by later generations who had no memory of these creatures. But here's what makes this really fascinating. Some cultures might have had actual cultural memories of megafauna passed down through oral traditions. Australian Aboriginal stories describe enormous animals that match descriptions of extinct megafauna remarkably well. Some Native American legends describe mammoths and mastodons with surprising accuracy, despite these animals having gone extinct thousands of years before European contact. These oral traditions, passed through hundreds of generations, preserved knowledge of creatures that once lived. When you combine actual cultural memory with later fossil discoveries, you get a perfect recipe for giant myths. Your ancestors told stories about massive creatures they once hunted. Then, centuries later, you find physical evidence, enormous bones emerging from the earth. The stories and the physical evidence reinforce each other, creating elaborate mythologies about giants that once ruled the earth. And the thing is, they weren't entirely wrong. Giants did walk the earth. They just weren't human giants. They were mammoths weighing 6 tons, ground sloths standing 6 meters tall, birds that hunted people, bears that could look you in the eye while standing on all fours. The real giants were even more spectacular than the myths. They were real, they were massive, and for thousands of years they lived alongside our ancestors. When those megafauna went extinct, humans lost something profound. We lost the creatures that had shaped our evolution, the animals that had taught us to cooperate, to plan, to innovate. Hunting megafauna required intelligence, coordination, technology. It pushed us to become better hunters, better toolmakers, better strategists. The megafauna made us human, and when they vanished, we didn't forget them. We couldn't forget them. They lived on in our stories, our myths, our legends, sometimes accurately, sometimes transformed by time and imagination into something even more spectacular. The giants of legend might be mythological, but they were inspired by creatures that were absolutely real. Those massive bones, scattered across every continent, weren't evidence of mythical titans. They were evidence of something equally amazing. A lost world of genuine giants, creatures so massive they defied belief, animals that shaped human evolution and human mythology in equal measure. The real giants walked on 4 legs, or stood on 2 with beaks instead of hands, or shuffled on massive clawed feet through forests that no longer exist. But they were real, and for a brief moment in Earth's history we lived alongside them. Let's talk about the oldest giant stories we have. Not fragments, not oral traditions that were written down centuries later, but actual written records from the very beginning of human civilization. Stories carved into clay tablets 5,000 years ago. Stories that mention giants as if they were historical fact. The most famous reference comes from the Hebrew Bible, Genesis chapter 6 verses 1 through 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The Hebrew word used is Nephilim, and for thousands of years, scholars have argued about what this word actually means. The traditional translation is giants, but the root word actually means those who fell, or those who cause others to fall, fallen ones. The passage is brief, almost frustratingly so. It shows up right before the flood narrative, as if it's explaining why God decided to wipe out humanity. These Nephilim, these giants, are presented as the offspring of sons of God and human women. The text doesn't elaborate. It just states this as if everyone reading it would already know what it meant. But here's what makes this really interesting. This wasn't just a Hebrew story. When you look at the broader Mesopotamian context, suddenly this brief biblical reference becomes part of a much larger tradition. The Hebrews were living in and around Mesopotamia during the period when their earliest texts were being compiled: Babylon, Sumer, Akkad. These civilizations had their own stories about giants, about divine beings interbreeding with humans, about a time before the Great Flood when the world was very different. The Sumerians had the most detailed records. They were the first civilization to develop writing, around 3400 BCE, and they used it to document everything: trade records, legal codes, religious texts, and history, especially history. The Sumerian King List is one of the most fascinating historical documents ever discovered. It's a chronological list of the kings who ruled Sumer, starting from when kingship descended from heaven after the Great Flood. But before the flood, the King List records something strange. It lists 8 kings who ruled for impossibly long periods. We're not talking about people living to 90 or 100. We're talking about reigns lasting 28,800 years, 36,000 years. One king supposedly ruled for 43,200 years. Modern scholars treat these numbers as mythological, obviously, symbolic rather than literal. Maybe they represent dynasties rather than individuals. Or maybe the Sumerians were using a different counting system that we don't fully understand. But the ancient Mesopotamians themselves presented these figures as factual history. They didn't mark them as myth or legend. They recorded them in the same matter-of-fact way they recorded the reigns of kings, who we know were real historical figures. And here's the thing that makes it even stranger. These antediluvian kings, these beings who lived before the flood, are often described as larger than normal humans, not always explicitly as giants, but as beings of exceptional size and power. The implication is there, woven through the texts. Then we have Gilgamesh, the most famous figure in ancient Mesopotamian literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the oldest written stories in human history, dating back to around 2100 BCE in its earliest versions. It tells the story of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, and his various adventures. But here's what's crucial. Gilgamesh isn't presented as a normal human. The text explicitly states that he was 2/3 god and 1/3 human. His mother was the goddess Ninsi. His father was a human king. And the epic describes him as being of exceptional size and strength. He builds the massive walls of Uruk, performs feats of strength that would be impossible for normal men, and generally operates on a scale that's superhuman. Now, was Gilgamesh a real person? Probably. Archaeological evidence suggests there really was a king of Uruk named Gilgamesh who ruled sometime around 2700 BCE. The city of Uruk was real, the walls were real. You can visit the archaeological site today. But was he actually a giant, part god, impossibly strong? That's where history shades into something else, something that could be myth or cultural memory, or an attempt to explain something that didn't fit the normal categories. When you look at Mesopotamian art, the ambiguity deepens. Cylinder seals, wall reliefs, statues. Again and again, you see figures depicted at different scales. Kings shown larger than ordinary people, gods shown larger than kings. In one famous relief from the Akkadian period, you see the king Naram-Sin depicted as much larger than his soldiers, striding up a mountain while his normal-sized troops follow behind. The traditional interpretation is that this is hierarchical scaling. Ancient artists use size to indicate importance, not literal physical dimensions. The king is shown bigger because he's more important, not because he actually was bigger. But what if it's not quite that simple? What if the convention of hierarchical scaling existed alongside actual traditions about rulers being physically larger? What if some of these depictions preserved memories of unusual individuals who really were exceptionally tall? And over time, these memories got mixed with artistic conventions and religious symbolism, until you couldn't separate what was literal from what was metaphorical. The Anunnaki complicate things further. In Sumerian religion, the Anunnaki were the gods who came from heaven to earth. The name literally means those who came from heaven to earth. They were the offspring of An, the sky god, and Kai, the earth goddess. And they were described as being much larger than humans. They taught humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy. Then, according to the myths, they interbreed with humans, creating a line of semi-divine kings and heroes. Sound familiar? It's essentially the same story as Genesis 6, just with more detail. Sons of God coming down, interbreeding with humans, creating a race of exceptional beings. And this wasn't unique to Mesopotamia. Variations of this story appear in Greek mythology, in Hindu texts, in Iranian traditions. There seems to be a common thread running through ancient Near Eastern cultures. The idea that before the modern era of humanity, there was an age when divine or semi-divine beings walked the earth and sometimes produced offspring with humans. Now we need to talk about the alternative interpretations, because this is where things get wild. In the 1960s and 70s, writers like Zecharia Sitchin began proposing that the Anunnaki were not gods or mythological beings, but actual extraterrestrial visitors. Ancient astronauts who came to Earth, genetically modified primitive humans to create workers, and were remembered as gods by the civilizations they created. Sitchin's books became bestsellers, spawning an entire alternative history movement. The academic community rejected Sitchin's interpretations almost universally. His translations of Sumerian texts were criticized as selective and often simply wrong. His astronomical interpretations didn't match what we know about orbital mechanics. His proposed timeline conflicted with genetic and archaeological evidence. But here's what's interesting. While Sitchin's specific claims were debunked, the questions he raised didn't go away. Why do so many ancient cultures have similar stories about divine beings interbreeding with humans? Why are there persistent traditions about giants in the earth? What is the Nephilim passage in Genesis really referring to? The mainstream archaeological interpretation is that these stories represent how ancient people tried to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand. Unusually tall individuals with genetic conditions like gigantism would have been rare enough to seem supernatural. Fossils of extinct megafauna could have been interpreted as evidence of giant humans. The artistic convention of depicting important people as physically larger eventually got literalized into actual beliefs about giant ancestors. Cultural memories of encountering other human species like Neanderthals, who were shorter but much more robust, might have contributed to stories about a different kind of human that once existed. All of this is plausible, reasonable, supported by evidence, but it leaves something unexplained. Why are these stories so specific? Why do they consistently link giants with the period before a great flood? Why do they describe interbreeding between two different types of beings? Why do they present this information not as fantasy or entertainment, but as sober historical record? The truth is probably more nuanced than either the believers or the skeptics want to admit. These ancient texts are likely a mixture of actual history, cultural memory, religious belief, and symbolic representation, all blended together over thousands of years of oral tradition before being written down. Trying to extract literal truth from them is like trying to separate individual ingredients from a cake that was baked millennia ago. What we can say is this: the ancient Mesopotamians believed their world had once been very different. They believed that beings of exceptional size and power had once existed. They recorded these beliefs not as entertaining stories but as history, as part of the genealogical record that connected them to the beginning of civilization. And these beliefs were widespread enough, consistent enough across cultures, that they made it into the earliest written records of human civilization. Whether there's any literal truth behind the myths, we may never know for certain. But the myths themselves tell us something important about how ancient people understood their world. They saw themselves as living in a diminished age, a time when the great powers that had shaped civilization were gone. The giants in the earth, whether literal or metaphorical, represented a connection to that lost past. A time when the boundaries between human and divine were less clear, when the world was younger and stranger, and more mysterious than the one they inhabited. And maybe that's the real legacy of the Nephilim enigma. Not proof of ancient giants, but evidence of how deeply humans have always sensed that our past contains mysteries we've forgotten, powers we've lost, and truths that might be hiding in our oldest stories. Picture ancient Greece, maybe 600 BCE. You're a shepherd grazing your flock on the slopes of Mount Etna in Sicily. The volcano rumbles periodically, reminding you that the earth beneath your feet is alive, restless, dangerous. One day, erosion from winter rains exposes something in the hillside, bones, massive bones. A skull the size of a wine barrel with a single enormous cavity in the center of the forehead. You've never seen anything like this. Your grandfather told you stories about the Cyclops, the one-eyed giants who forged thunderbolts for Zeus in caves beneath the volcano. You always thought they were just stories, but here's the proof, right in front of you. The giants were real, except they weren't. What you found wasn't a Cyclops skull. It was the fossilized remains of a dwarf elephant, species that had lived on Mediterranean islands for millions of years before going extinct. The large nasal cavity in the center of the skull, where the trunk attached in life, looked exactly like a single eye socket to someone who had never seen an elephant before. But you didn't know that. Nobody in ancient Greece knew that. So you interpreted what you saw through the only framework you had. The stories your culture had been telling for generations. The myths of giants who had walked the earth before the gods established order. Greek mythology is obsessed with giants, not just one kind, but an entire hierarchy of enormous beings, each with their own origin story, their own role in the cosmic order. At the top were the Titans, the original gods who ruled during the Golden Age before Zeus and the Olympians took power. These weren't just big humans. They were primordial forces of nature given form. Cronus, the titan of time. Oceanus, the titan of the world-encircling sea. Hyperion, the titan of light. They were vast, immortal, and according to the myths, they literally held up the sky and the foundations of the earth. Then came the Gigantes, the giants proper. Born from the blood of Uranus when he was castrated by Cronus, these beings were specifically created as weapons against the Olympian gods. The myths describe them as enormous warriors with serpents for legs, strong enough to hurl mountains and island-sized boulders. They weren't just physical threats. They represented the old order, the primordial chaos that existed before civilization, before law, before the organized cosmos that Zeus and his siblings established. The war between the giants and the Olympian gods, the Gigantomachy, was one of the central myths of Greek culture. Every major temple, every important piece of public art referenced it in some way. The Parthenon in Athens had the entire battle depicted on its interior frieze. The altar of Zeus at Pergamon, one of the wonders of the ancient world, was covered with scenes of gods battling giants in incredible detail. This wasn't just entertainment, it was the foundation myth of Greek civilization itself. The story that explained how order triumphed over chaos, how civilization conquered the wild forces of nature. But here's what's fascinating. The Greeks didn't think these were just stories. They thought the Gigantomachy was history. Ancient historians like Pausanias and Pliny the Elder wrote about finding giant bones as if they were documenting archaeological discoveries. Pausanias, travelling through Greece in the 2nd century CE, mentions seeing a giant's rib bone in a temple at Athens. He describes it as 10 feet long, clearly from one of the giants who fought against the gods. Pliny writes about the skeleton of Orestes being discovered, measuring over 10 feet tall. Another account describes the bones of Ajax being found on a beach after a storm, the skeleton of a man far larger than any living human. What were they actually finding? Probably the same thing that Shepard found on Mount Etna. Fossils of extinct megafauna that once lived across the Mediterranean. Dwarf elephants on the islands, full-sized mammoths and mastodons on the mainland. Giant deer, cave bears, ancient rhinoceros. The Mediterranean basin was littered with the bones of these extinct animals, and the ancient Greeks had no framework for understanding what they were looking at. Paleontology wouldn't exist for another 2,000 years. The concept of extinction didn't exist yet. So when you found enormous bones that didn't match any living animal, you interpreted them as the remains of something from the mythical past. Giants, heroes, titans. The Cyclops mythology is particularly interesting because it shows how closely these myths were tied to specific landscapes. The Cyclopes weren't just random monsters. They were specifically associated with volcanic regions, Mount Etna in Sicily, the volcanic islands of the Aegean, places where the earth itself seemed violent and alive, where fire came from beneath the ground, where you could hear roaring and rumbling as if something massive was trapped below. The myth said the Cyclops lived in caves beneath these volcanoes, working as blacksmiths for the gods, creating Zeus's thunderbolts and Poseidon's trident. The smoke and fire from volcanic vents weren't just geological phenomena. They were evidence of the Cyclops forges, proof that these giant craftsmen were still down there, still working. This makes perfect sense when you think about how ancient peoples tried to understand their environment. You're living on an island dominated by an active volcano. Every few years it erupts, throwing house-sized boulders into the air, covering fields in ash, occasionally destroying entire settlements. The ground shakes regularly. Strange gases seep from caves. You need an explanation for all this destructive power, something that makes sense within your worldview. Giants living beneath a mountain, occasionally angry, occasionally active. That's an explanation that works. It gives you a framework for understanding forces that are otherwise completely beyond your control or comprehension. The same pattern shows up across the Mediterranean. In Crete, myths about giants were associated with earthquake-prone regions. In Asia Minor, areas with hot springs and geothermal activity were said to be places where giants had been buried or imprisoned. The myth of Typhon, the most dangerous giant of all, described him being trapped beneath Mount Etna by Zeus. When Typhon struggled to escape, the mountain shook. When he breathed, smoke and fire emerged. The mythology was providing a cause and effect explanation for volcanic and seismic activity. But it wasn't just volcanoes and earthquakes. The Greeks also used giant myths to explain other geological features. The giant Antaeus was said to have been killed by Heracles in North Africa, his blood forming the red soil of the desert. The island of Sicily was supposedly created when Zeus hurled mountains at the giants during the Gigantomachy, the impacts forming the triangular shape of the island. Massive boulders scattered across landscapes were explained as ammunition from the giant wars, literally petrified weapons from battles fought at the dawn of time. Here's where it gets really interesting though. Some ancient writers weren't entirely convinced by the giant explanations. Strabo, the Greek geographer, wrote skeptically about some of the giant bone claims. He suggested that what people were calling giant skeletons might be something else, though he didn't have an alternative explanation. Aristotle, in his various works on natural history, never mentions giants as if they were real creatures, despite cataloguing hundreds of animal species. It's as if the more educated, more scientifically minded Greeks had doubts about the literal reality of these beings, even while the myths remained culturally dominant. But the mythology persisted because it served too many important functions. It explained the fossils people kept finding. It explained geological violence and landscape features that were otherwise mysterious. Most importantly, it provided a narrative framework for understanding civilization itself. The triumph of the Olympians over the giants wasn't just a war story. It was the story of how order emerged from chaos, how civilization conquered the wilderness, how human intelligence and divine law replaced brute strength and natural violence. Every Greek city-state had its own giant stories, its own local variations on the theme. In Thessaly, they told stories of the battle between the Olympians and the Titans taking place on local mountains, explaining why certain peaks were shattered or why valleys had unusual formations. In the Peloponnese, numerous sites claimed to hold giant bones or the burial places of heroes of extraordinary size. These weren't just archaeological claims, they were statements of prestige. Having giant bones in your city meant your city had connections to the mythical age, that your land had been important even in the time of heroes and giants. The Romans inherited these myths when they conquered Greece and expanded them across their empire. Roman historians continued reporting discoveries of giant bones, now interpreting them as evidence of the mythical founders of Rome or of enemies defeated in Rome's legendary past. The myth of giants had become so embedded in Mediterranean culture that it survived the transition from Greek to Roman civilization almost unchanged. What's remarkable is how universal this pattern is. Mediterranean cultures weren't unique in creating giant myths to explain fossils and geological phenomena. We see the same thing happening independently across the world. But the Greek version became particularly influential because it was written down, preserved, and eventually spread through Western culture. When later Europeans found large fossils, they often interpreted them through the lens of Greek mythology, calling them Cyclops' bones or giant remains, continuing a tradition of misinterpretation that had begun thousands of years earlier on the volcanic slopes of Sicily. The shepherd who found that elephant skull couldn't have known he was part of this vast pattern of human interpretation. He just knew he'd found something enormous, something that confirmed the stories his grandfather had told him. The giants had been real. And in a way, he was right. Giants had walked the earth, just not the kind he imagined. By the time European settlers started pushing across the North American continent, they thought they were discovering a new world. But the people already living there had been watching the land rise and fall, forests advance and retreat, ice sheets melt and vanish for thousands of years. They had seen animals come and go, rivers change course, shorelines drown. They had something the newcomers didn't. Deep time memory. And in that memory, all across the continent, one figure keeps appearing. Giants. Not just one story, not just one tribe. From the Great Basin to the Great Lakes, from the Mississippi Valley to the Pacific Northwest, indigenous oral traditions describe beings that were bigger, stronger, more dangerous than ordinary humans. Sometimes they were enemies, sometimes teachers, sometimes half spirit, half flesh, always larger than life. And just like with Neanderthals and Denisovans, when you start looking closely, the line between myth and memory gets blurry very fast. Take the Paiute of Nevada. Long before there was a Wild West, long before prospectors and ranchers and railroad towns, the Paiute were already telling stories about the Sita-Ka. In their language, the name is often translated as something like two-liters, people who lived among the reeds. But in the legends, they're not just another tribe, they're giants. Red-haired, light-skinned, aggressive. The Sita-Ka are described as towering over ordinary people, raiding neighbouring groups, even practicing cannibalism. According to later accounts recorded by Paiute storytellers in the 19th century, these giants were eventually driven to the mouth of a cave by a coalition of tribes. When the Sita-Ka refused to come out, their enemies piled brush at the entrance and set it on fire, trapping the giants inside. The last of the man-eaters died in darkness and smoke. For the Paiute, this wasn't a Marvel movie plot. It was clan history, passed on in winter lodges around the fire, repeated enough times that every child knew the story. The cave in the story, it wasn't abstract. It had a name and a place, Lovelock. Fast forward to the early 1900s. Miners digging bat guano, ancient compacted bat droppings used as fertilizer, start working in Lovelock Cave in northwestern Nevada. Under layers of guano, they notice something else: artifacts, baskets, wooden tools, woven duck decoys so detailed that modern archaeologists still marvel at them. Human remains. When archaeologists finally get involved, they realize this isn't just any cave, it's a time capsule. Radiocarbon dating would later show that people had been using Lovelock Cave for thousands of years. The artifacts belong to real human communities, not fantasy giants. But somewhere in this mix of genuine archaeology and rough frontier excavation, a new story begins to grow. Accounts spread that unusually tall skeletons were found in the cave, 7 feet, 8 feet, red hair still clinging to their skulls. Some reports claim that miners destroyed or discarded many of the bones before scientists arrived. Later writers would insist that the tallest skeletons quietly disappeared into museum basements, never to be seen again. This is where the historical record starts to fray. On the one hand, we know Lovelock Cave is real. The excavations are documented. Some of the artifacts and human remains are still in museum collections today. The people who used the cave were probably ancestors of modern northern Paiute, using the site as a seasonal storage and habitation area. Their average heights, based on surviving skeletons, are firmly in normal human range. No verified 8-footers. On the other hand, the stories about giant skeletons refuse to die. They show up in local histories, old letters, later interviews. Some mention measurements taken before bones were lost. Others hint that institutions like the Smithsonian stepped in, collected the biggest remains, and then nothing. Silence. Which brings us to one of the most persistent themes in the whole giant saga: the missing evidence. If you start digging into 19th and early 20th century American newspapers, you keep running into the same pattern. A farmer opens a mound in Ohio and finds a skeleton of gigantic proportions. A road crew in West Virginia uncovers burial pits holding men over 7 feet in height. A mining operation in Minnesota hits a grave with a race of giants whose jawbones fit over a modern man's face. These stories were printed in ordinary local papers right alongside crop prices and church announcements, and over again they end the same way. The skeletons were carefully packed and forwarded to the Smithsonian Institution. After that, the trail goes cold. No accession records anyone can find. No labelled skeletons in museum collections, at least not under giant. Conspiracy-minded researchers argue that the bones are there, simply hidden, misfiled, or deliberately kept from public view because they don't fit the standard narrative of human evolution. Museum professionals respond that there is no evidence of such a cover-up, and that many newspaper accounts from that era wildly exaggerated height estimates or confused scattered bones with intact skeletons. So which is it? A real pattern of missing data, or a story we've told ourselves about missing data? To answer that, you have to understand another piece of the puzzle: the mounds themselves. Across the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys, indigenous societies built monumental earthworks, conical burial mounds, geometric enclosures, platform mounds that would have rivaled European cathedrals in scale, if not in stone. Today, archaeologists attribute many of these to what they call the Adena, Hopewell, and Mississippian cultural traditions, but those are modern labels. For the people who built them, they were sacred landscapes. Early European Americans didn't believe that. They couldn't imagine that the Indians they saw around them, whose populations had been devastated by disease and colonization, were descended from master builders. So they invented another story, a mysterious mound builder race, separate from and superior to Native Americans, wiped out by later savages. Into this already biased framework, the giant skeleton articles slot perfectly. A lost race of giants, building mounds, destroyed by normal Indians. It flattered colonial attitudes. It justified taking land. It turned living people into usurpers of someone else's achievement. There's another layer. People in the 1800s were terrible at estimating height from fragmentary bones. They often measured skeletons with the spine unnaturally stretched, or added inches based on guesswork. A 6'2" man could easily become nearly 8 feet. In a sensationalist retelling, a burial containing disarticulated long bones might be mistakenly reassembled into a single impossibly tall giant. And in some cases they weren't even looking at human bones. For thousands of years before Europeans arrived, indigenous peoples in North America were digging up the remains of the true giants, mastodons and mammoths. These elephant relatives roamed the continent during the Ice Age, leaving behind massive tusks and bones that sometimes eroded out of riverbanks or fields. To someone without modern paleontology, a femur thicker than your arm, a skull larger than any known animal, it all demanded an explanation. Some tribes interpreted these finds as remains of ancient thunderbirds, monstrous bears, or earth-shaping spirits. Others folded them into tales of giant human-like beings who roamed the world before the current age. When your oral traditions already included stories of powerful, oversized people, stumbling on a mammoth femur could feel like proof. European settlers did something similar. In the 1700s and early 1800s, many educated Americans believed that large fossil bones belonged to an extinct race of gigantic humans, not animals. The term mammoth itself became a synonym for enormous person in popular speech. It took decades for the idea of extinct megafauna to really sink in. So you have at least 3 sources feeding into the giant narrative: genuine indigenous stories about large or powerful beings, misidentified megafauna bones, and a 19th century culture eager to discover dramatic newspaper-selling finds and to imagine lost races that conveniently weren't the people whose land they were occupying. But here's what makes the Native American giant traditions different from simple hoaxes. They're everywhere. Long before newspapers, tribes across the continent were already talking about beings who were bigger than ordinary humans. The specifics change region by region, but the pattern persists. In the Great Lakes area, some Ojibwe stories speak of towering cannibal beings, like the Wendigo, whose size can swell with their hunger. In the southwest, some Pueblo traditions mention ancient large people who lived in different ways in different times. On the plains, certain stories describe primordial humans or spirit people who were huge, living in a world where animals and humans weren't yet clearly separated. In the Pacific Northwest, there are tales of Saskets or other giant-like forest dwellers, sometimes physical, sometimes spirit, encountered on remote ridges or deep in cedar groves. These beings aren't all the same. Some are clearly spiritual, shape-shifting, metaphorical. Others are described in oddly physical terms. They eat specific foods, leave tracks, fight wars, build things. Not every giant in indigenous tradition maps neatly onto a fossil bone or a tall neighbor tribe. Many belong to a mythic layer of reality where moral lessons, history and cosmology blend. When 19th century writers started collecting these traditions, they often flattened them, stripping out context and complexity, turning sacred beings into comic book monsters. Then they stapled those simplified stories onto every oversized skeleton report they heard about, real or imagined. Our job, looking back, is to separate those layers without tearing the fabric. Some accounts of giant skeletons are almost certainly exaggerated or fabricated. The incentive to create a good story was huge, and newspaper fact-checking was almost non-existent. Some are probably mismeasured tall, but otherwise normal humans. Every population has outliers. A very small number might represent individuals with medical conditions like gigantism or acromegaly, rare but real in any large population. And some giant remains, especially those associated with mounds, may never have existed outside the imagination of people who wanted to believe in a lost race. But the oral traditions themselves, those are harder to dismiss. Like the stories of Neanderthal or Denisovan-like beings lingering in distant mountains, native accounts of giants might be carrying multiple memories at once. Memories of encounters with very tall neighbouring groups, memories of Ice Age megafauna bones eroding from riverbanks, memories of earlier cultural layers when people conceptualize size and power differently, and memories of something else we can't quite pin down, something that sits in that shadowy zone between physical reality and the way a culture makes sense of its world. What we can say is this: the continent that would one day be called America was once home to genuine giants, mammoths, mastodons, giant bison, ground sloths the size of small cars. Human beings lived alongside them, hunted them, stumbled on their bones for thousands of years. Those experiences left marks, not in DNA, but in stories. When those stories speak of giants, they may not be giving us a literal fossil record, but they are giving us something else just as precious. A record of how people tried to understand a land where enormous bones came out of the ground, where earthworks rose like green pyramids, where the past was always one shovel's depth away. And in that sense, the giants of Native American tradition are very real. They're the towering figures that stand at the boundary between what we can prove and what we can only imagine. Travel now, in your mind, thousands of miles from Ice Age Europe and the caves of Denisovans. Cross deserts, mountain ranges, whole oceans. Follow the descendants of those bottleneck survivors as they spread into the vastness of the Pacific and the crowded landscapes of Asia. Here, far from the mammoths and cave lions of the West, another kind of giant took shape. Not just in bones and footprints, but in memory, in stone, in stories whispered around island fires and mountain monasteries. These were places defined by extremes, endless seas, towering peaks, jungles so dense you could disappear a few steps from the path. In environments like these, human imagination did what it always does when it collides with the unknown. It made giants. Start in the open Pacific, on islands that seem impossibly small when you look at them on a map. To early navigators, they weren't small. They were entire worlds. Oceanic cultures like the Maori, the Tongans, the Samoans, the Hawaiians, all preserve stories of beings who are bigger, stronger, and older than ordinary humans. In some traditions, they were giant builders, stacking stones the size of houses, lifting canoes that would take a whole village to move today. In others, they were master navigators, crossing distances that modern sailors wouldn't dare attempt without GPS. The Polynesians themselves were extraordinary seafarers. Using only the stars, ocean swells, and the flight patterns of birds, they colonized an area larger than North America, hopping from island to island over thousands of miles of open water. To later generations, those achievements must have felt superhuman. So when people looked at massive stone platforms or ancient harbours or strange ruins whose original purpose had been forgotten, it was easy, maybe inevitable, to say, giants built these, not people like us, something more. On some islands, those giants were remembered as literal ancestors, in others as rival peoples defeated and driven away, in still others as culture heroes who taught the first humans how to survive on remote specks of land in a hostile ocean. Were these memories of earlier waves of migration, taller or stronger populations now long gone? Or were they simply a way of explaining the breathtaking accomplishments of their own forebears? The answer might be both. Myths are rarely either or. They are usually layered yes-ands. Now sail eastward to one of the loneliest inhabited places on Earth, Rapa Nui, better known as Easter Island. Here, giant memory isn't just in stories. It's staring back at you in silence. Hundreds of Moai stone figures up to 10 meters tall and weighing as much as 80 tons stand or lie scattered across the island. Their faces are elongated, their expressions are grave, almost watchful. For centuries, outsiders looked at these statues and thought the same thing Polynesian storytellers did when they talked about giant builders. How on earth did people on such a small, resource-limited island carve, transport and raise these colossi? The most widely accepted explanation is that the Moai represent deified ancestors. Not random giants, but specific lineages, specific chiefs or revered figures whose mana, or spiritual power, could protect and bless the living. In that sense, they're a kind of controlled giantism. The ancestors were turned into giants in stone so they could loom over the landscape, keep watch over crops, water sources and people. Archaeologists have shown that the Moai could be walked upright using ropes and coordinated teams, rocking the statues forward step by step. No superhuman strength required, just engineering and cooperation. But even when you know that, standing in front of an 80-ton face staring out over the Pacific, it's hard not to feel that you're in the presence of something immense, something deliberately larger than life. Head now in the opposite direction, across the Asian mainland, and the giants become darker, stranger. In Japan, the deep forests and remote mountains are said to hide Oni, hulking ogre-like beings with wild hair, horns and a taste for human flesh. In old paintings and woodblock prints, Oni are massive compared to ordinary people, broad-shouldered, heavy-limbed, terrifying. They're not subtle giants. They're blunt instruments of chaos and punishment. Oni show up in stories as bandits of the spirit world, raiding villages, kidnapping, devouring. But they also appear in moral tales, where brave monks or samurai confront and defeat them. In that role, Oni become more than monsters. They are tests, challenges that humans must overcome to prove courage, discipline and spiritual strength. Their very size raises the stakes. You're not just fighting a thief, you're facing down something that looks like it could tear a house apart with its bare hands. Just across the water, in Korea, a cousin to the Oni appears, the Dokebi. Dokebi aren't always huge, but in many tales they're towering, club-wielding tricksters, capable of bending reality for fun or revenge. They invite humans to wrestling matches, appear on lonely roads, and sometimes turn malevolent. Other times, they reward the kind-hearted with treasure. Their giant size isn't just physical. It's a way of saying their emotions, their power, their unpredictability are outsized too. When you strip away the horns and clubs, both Oni and Dokebi feel like personifications of something very old. The fear of the forest, the mountain, the night road. Places where early villagers knew that anything could happen. A single encounter with a tiger, a bandit, a landslide could wipe out a life in seconds. Make that danger taller, stronger, just beyond human scale, and you have a giant demon. Climb now into the Himalayas, to another kind of giant, one covered in hair, half seen through blowing snow, the Yeti. Tibetan and Sherpa traditions describe large, ape-like beings that haunt glaciers and high passes, not just random monsters, but often beings with rules, with territories, sometimes even with a kind of rough spirituality. In some stories they are dangerous, in others almost guardian-like, punishing the arrogant or greedy who disrespect them.